simple question before we begin. Do you like Agatha Christie stories? If yes, type yes in the comments. I'll really appreciate it. Hello, I'm Uncle Lee, your host. And before we dive into today's mystery, don't forget to hit that subscribe button that will give you better feelings for now. Now, let's get into the story. Scene 1. A gathering of storytellers. The evening had grown comfortable inside Colonel Bantry's drawing room, the soft glow of the lamps casting long shadows against the patterned wallpaper. Jane Helier, her head tilted at a practiced angle, smiled with the sort of radiance that had once silenced entire theatres. She turned her luminous gaze toward Dr. Lloyd. "Surely, Doctor, you must know some tale of mystery, something that sends a chill down the spine," she said, her voice light but insistent. Jane was still the most admired woman in London's acting circles, though her peers whispered privately that her talent rested more in her beauty than in her craft. "She doesn't act," they would mutter. "She simply looks at you." And indeed, those striking eyes were now fixed on the flustered country doctor. Dr. Lloyd, a bachelor who had given the last 5 years to the small comforts and ailments of St. Mary Mead's residence, shifted awkwardly in his chair. His hand went unconsciously to the buttons of his waistcoat, tighter these days than he liked to admit, as he searched his memory for something worthy of recounting. He could not bear to disappoint the radiant Miss Helier. "I think tonight," Jane added dreamily, "I should like to lose myself in stories of crime. Something dreadful, but fascinating." "Capital idea!" roared Colonel Bantry, the host of the evening. His laugh was deep and booming, filling the room with cheer. He turned toward his wife with an affectionate twinkle. "Don't you agree, Dolly?" Mrs. Bantry, who had been privately considering her plans for the spring garden, blinked and nodded. "Oh yes, quite right, indeed." "Always agreeable, my dear," teased Miss Marple from her quiet corner, her eyes bright with mischief. Dr. Lloyd cleared his throat. "I'm afraid, Miss Helier, you will not find many cases of murder or haunting in a place as quiet as St. Mary Mead." At this, Sir Henry Clithering, retired Commissioner of Scotland Yard, raised his brows with a faint smile. "Strange," he said thoughtfully. "I was under the impression, thanks to our dear Miss Marple, that this little village was rather a nest of scandal and intrigue." Miss Marple gave a modest shake of her head, her cheeks colouring slightly. "Oh no, Sir Henry, I have never said so. I merely pointed out that human nature is the same whether one is in Mayfair or in a small parish. The only difference is that here one has the leisure to observe it more closely." Jane leaned further toward Dr. Lloyd, her expression intent. "But you haven't always been here, Doctor. You've travelled, seen foreign places, strange people, things one does not encounter in a quiet English garden. Surely you have a story from those days." For a moment, the doctor hesitated, almost resisting the memory tugging at the edge of his mind. Then his eyes lit with sudden clarity, and he leaned back with a long exhale. "Yes," he said slowly. "Yes, you're right. There was something. An incident I had quite forgotten until now. Something unusual, even unsettling. Peculiar in every sense of the word." The room fell silent as the others leaned forward, waiting. Scene 2. A vacation in the Canary Islands. Dr. Lloyd's voice carried a hint of nostalgia as he leaned back, the glimmer of memory softening his expression. "The last twist of fate that placed the clue directly in my path," he began, "was just as peculiar as the rest." Jane Helier, intrigued, shifted her chair ever so slightly closer. With a practiced hand, she refreshed the crimson on her lips, her gaze fixed intently on him. Around the table, conversation hushed. Every face turned toward the doctor, curiosity sharpening in the air like the tightening of a bowstring. "I wonder," he said slowly, "how many of you are familiar with the Canary Islands?" Jane's brows lifted. "They must be delightful," she murmured dreamily. "Are they in the South Seas, or is it the Mediterranean?" Colonel Bantry chuckled. "Neither, my dear. I've passed through them en route to South Africa, the sunset over Tenerife's peak. Now that is something to behold." Dr. Lloyd nodded politely, but raised a hand. "Indeed. But the episode I'm about to recount didn't happen in Tenerife. It unfolded on Gran Canaria many years ago when poor health forced me to abandon my medical practice in England and seek rest abroad. That is how I found myself in Las Palmas, the island's bustling capital." For a moment, he let silence hang, as if he could still see the place in his mind's eye. Life there suited me more than I expected. The days were sunlit and breezy, perfect weather for sea bathing, which I adored. The harbor, though, fascinated me most. Las Palmas was a crossroad of the world, with ships arriving from every direction: South America, Africa, Europe. Each morning, I would wander the mole, watching the ceaseless rhythm of sailors shouting, cargo shifting, and travelers stepping ashore. To me, it was as entertaining as Bond Street might be to a lady surrounded by shop windows full of new hats. He smiled faintly before continuing. Now, because ships docked so frequently, the Metropole Hotel became something of a meeting place for travelers of every nationality. People heading to Tenerife often paused there for a day or two, mingling with diplomats, merchants, and the occasional adventurer. And it was at the Metropole that the incident I speak of began, on a Thursday evening in January. Dr. Lloyd settled deeper into his chair, his tones slowing into reminiscence. That night, a dance was underway. A friend and I had taken a small table to the side, content to observe. The ballroom was crowded, English faces mixed with Spaniards, though it was the locals who dominated the floor when the orchestra struck up a tango. They danced with such grace that it was impossible not to admire them. But one woman in particular drew every eye. She was tall, striking, and moved with the fluid power of a wild animal barely restrained, a leopardess pacing under the watch of a tamer. There was beauty, yes, but also something dangerous about her, as though passion and misfortune walked at her side. Dr. Lloyd's eyes glinted. I remarked on it to my companion, and he agreed instantly. "A woman like that," he said, "is destined for a dramatic life. Such people never fade into the background. Life clings to them, sometimes for good, more often for ill." I mused aloud that beauty itself might be a perilous gift, but he shook his head. "It isn't only beauty," he told me. "Look closely. She carries with her the air of inevitability. Wherever she goes, extraordinary things will follow." The doctor paused, then added with a wry smile, "My friend, however, was quick to compare." He glanced across the room and gestured toward two women who had just entered, passengers he assumed from the Holland Lloyd ship that had docked that evening. I followed his gaze. At once I understood his meaning. They were English, genteel, well-preserved, and unmistakably conventional. One was fair-haired and comfortably plump, the other darker and too thin, though equally respectable. Both were neatly dressed in tweeds, their hats sensible, their faces untouched by cosmetics. They carried themselves with the quiet assurance of women who had been raised to know their place in society. They were the sort, I thought, who would consult a Baedeker's guidebook with utmost seriousness, ticking off landmarks one by one, never straying beyond the safety of what was recommended. If there happened to be an English library or an Anglican service nearby, I would have wagered they'd be present without fail. Perhaps, I thought with some amusement, One of them even attempted watercolors of local scenery. He gave a short laugh. My friend was adamant. Women like those would never stumble into adventure. Even if they traveled across the globe, their lives would remain as orderly and predictable as a church pew. Jane Helier gave a dramatic sigh. Such a pity. Truly, it is foolish not to make the most of what one has. That Spanish dancer you spoke of must have been marvelous. It reminds me of Audrey Denman. Have you seen her in The Downward Step? She plays a schoolgirl in the first act, utterly convincing, though she must be nearly 60. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her eyes sparkling. Do go on, Doctor. I love tales about exotic Spanish women. It makes me forget how stout and middle-aged I've become. Dr. Lloyd chuckled, shaking his head. I fear I must disappoint you, Mrs. Bantry. The tale is not about the Spanish beauty at all. Jane blinked. Not about her? But surely— No, he said firmly. You see, my friend and I were quite mistaken. Nothing dramatic befell her. In fact, she married a shipping clerk and before long was the mother of 5. The last I heard, she was more concerned with groceries than with destiny. Miss Marple gave a small nod. That is often the way. I recall a girl in St. Mary Mead, Israel Peters's daughter. Everyone predicted scandal when she went on the stage. Instead, she married a commercial traveller and lived happily ever after. Villagers do love to imagine drama where there is none. Indeed, Sir Henry murmured with amusement, but Dr. Lloyd's voice grew more serious. No, the true story lies elsewhere, not with the dancer, but with the 2 English ladies my friend had dismissed so casually. Jane Helier caught her breath. You mean something happened to them? Yes, he said gravely. Something did, and not eventually, the very next day. A hush fell over the group. They were Miss Mary Barton and Miss Amy Durrent of Little Paddocks, Cordon Weir, Buckinghamshire. I saw their names later in the hotel register. At the time, they meant nothing to me. I had no reason to think I'd ever notice them again. Yet, by the next morning, I found myself drawn into their lives, and into a tragedy I could never have foreseen. Dr. Lloyd exhaled slowly, as though the memory pressed heavily upon him. That following day, I was to join some friends on a picnic. Scene 3. The Tragedy by the Bay. Our plan that morning had been simple enough: to drive across the island with a basket of provisions, stopping at a secluded cove known locally as Las Nieves. The spot was well sheltered, a quiet bay where the sea lay calm and inviting, a place ideal for a leisurely swim before afternoon tea. We set out, later than intended, however, and agreed to pause halfway for a light picnic before continuing. Spirits were high, and nothing foreshadowed the grim discovery that awaited us. As we neared the coastline, the cheerful chatter in the car fell silent. A strange commotion had overtaken the little fishing village ahead. Nearly the whole population stood gathered on the beach, their voices rising in an urgent, overlapping chorus. At once they surged toward us, waving their arms, their rapid Spanish carrying a tone of alarm rather than welcome. It took several moments before I pieced together their meaning, and when I did, a chill spread through me. 2 English visitors had gone into the sea together. One, swimming farther out, had quickly become distressed. Her companion, in a desperate attempt to save her, had struck out into the waves as well, only to find herself exhausted and close to drowning. A fisherman had seen the peril from shore, rowed furiously toward them, and managed to drag both women into his boat. But for one of them, the first who cried out, the effort had come too late. Pushing my way through the anxious crowd, I reached the shoreline. There, kneeling on the sand beside the still figure of her friend, was the surviving woman. She wore a black wool bathing costume clinging to her damp frame, her hair hidden beneath a tight green rubber cap. Her face was set in grim determination as she attempted artificial respiration, though it was obvious she had little idea of proper technique. "I'm a doctor," I said firmly, lowering myself beside her. At once her shoulders sagged in relief, as if a terrible burden had been lifted. I instructed her to leave the beach at once. Her body was chilled and she needed dry clothes. One of our party guided her toward a nearby fisherman's cottage, while I turned my full attention to the lifeless form on the sand. Every method I knew, I employed. Compressions, resuscitation, every possible measure. But it was futile. Life had ebbed away before she was pulled from the sea. At last, with heavy reluctance, I ceased my efforts. Later, in the dim interior of the cottage, I found the survivor wrapped in ordinary clothes, her damp costume bundled aside. Recognition struck me then. I had seen her among the new arrivals to the island only the previous evening. Delivering the truth was never pleasant, but she received the news with a composure that surprised me. Her voice trembled less from grief than from sheer disbelief at the suddenness of the loss. "Poor Amy," she murmured, her eyes unfocused. "She was so eager for this holiday, and she loved the water. She was always such a strong swimmer. I can't understand how it happened." "It may have been a cramp," I offered gently. "Can you tell me exactly what occurred?" She nodded slowly, drawing a deep, steadying breath. "We had been swimming together for perhaps 20 minutes. I began to feel weary and told Amy I was going back to shore. She insisted on one last swim, and I left her. Then suddenly, I heard her cry out. She was calling for help. I turned back at once. When I reached her, she was still afloat but frantic, thrashing wildly, grabbing at me. We both went under more than once. If that fisherman hadn't rowed out when he did..." She shuddered, unable to finish the thought. "It is often so," I reassured her softly. "Rescuing a drowning person is fraught with danger. They cling in panic, and it drags both under." Miss Barton, so she gave her name, stared into the middle distance. "It's dreadful," she whispered. "We were so happy only yesterday, unpacking our cases, laughing about our plans, the sun, the sea, the promise of the holiday. Everything seemed perfect. And now?" Her words trailed into silence, her expression both dazed and strangely detached. I pressed gently for details, explaining that the Spanish authorities would need a full account. She complied without hesitation, her answers clear and deliberate, though her face remained pale and strained. Beneath her composure, I sensed a woman not yet overcome by grief, but by the sheer incomprehensibility of sudden death. Scene 4. The Enigma of Amy Durrent. The young woman known as Miss Amy Durrent had, for nearly half a year, travelled in the role of Miss Barton's paid companion. According to Miss Barton, their relationship had been cordial and agreeable, though Amy herself remained curiously private, reluctant to speak of her past. What little was known came from fragments. She had been orphaned at an early age, brought up under the guardianship of an uncle, and after reaching her majority, she had managed to support herself with quiet dignity. Beyond these sparse details, Amy Durrent had shared nothing of substance about her history. Dr. Penderley, who had investigated the matter at the time, recounted his findings with a tone of finality. That, in essence, was all we could learn. The actress Jane Hellier, listening with an air of perplexity, frowned. "So that is the whole story? Of course it's sad, terribly sad, but hardly what one would call uncanny or sinister." Sir Henry Lytton, seated nearby, exchanged a knowing glance with her. "I suspect the doctor has not yet finished," he murmured. Dr. Penderley inclined his head gravely. "Indeed, For at first I thought the case closed, but there was one troubling element that refused to let me rest. He paused, his eyes distant, as though reliving the seaside scene. I spoke with the fishermen and bystanders who had been on the beach that day. Their accounts agreed on most particulars, yet one witness, a Spanish woman from the village, insisted she had seen something far more disturbing. She claimed Miss Durrent was not flailing helplessly in the water at all. Instead, she swore it was Miss Barton who had swum out to her companion, and rather than helping her, had pressed her beneath the waves. A murmur of shock swept the listeners. Of course, the doctor continued, I dismissed it at first. From a distance, such incidents can appear misleading. A rescuer may struggle with a drowning person, holding them down momentarily to prevent both from sinking. I told myself that must be the explanation. But, his voice lowered, the woman was adamant. To her, it looked deliberate, like an act of drowning, not saving. He let the weight of those words linger before resuming. I tried to put the account aside, but it haunted me. And when we attempted to trace Amy Durrent's life, what we discovered was even more unsettling. She seemed to have left no mark upon the world. No relatives came forward, no correspondences were found, no friends claimed her. Miss Barton and I searched her possessions, hoping for some clue, yet we unearthed only the barest traces of existence. A small rented room in town, a handful of second-hand furniture, neatly folded fabrics, and some bound volumes of old Academy pictures. Nothing personal, no letters, no diaries, nothing that bound her to anyone at all. Even the landlady who had leased the room recalled almost nothing, save that Amy once mentioned losing her parents in India and being raised by a clergyman uncle. But whether he was from her father's side or mother's, she had not said. That solitary fact led nowhere. Among her effects we discovered 2 faded photographs, their edges trimmed to fit cheap frames, with no photographer's mark to trace their origin. There was also a single daguerreotype, possibly her mother, perhaps even her grandmother. Beyond that, nothing but silence. As for references, when Miss Barton had first employed Amy, she possessed 2. One had since been forgotten completely. The other, after some persistence, was traced to a woman now living in Australia. We wrote to her, and after a long delay, a letter arrived. It confirmed that Amy had once served her as a companion and had proved capable and pleasant. But of her past, her family, or her character, the woman knew absolutely nothing. The doctor spread his hands in quiet resignation. That was the whole of it. On the surface, nothing criminal, nothing that one might seize upon as proof. Yet the absence of any real background disturbed me. A life so empty of ties, was it by chance or by design? He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more intimate note. And then there was one final impression. While I knelt on the beach beside Amy's lifeless body, doing all I could though knowing it was useless, I happened to glance up. Miss Barton was walking away toward the huts. Just before reaching them, she turned back. For a fleeting instant, I saw her face clearly. There was something there, something cold, unfathomable, that has never left my memory. Scene 5. The final clue. As Miss Barton made her way from the water's edge, something about her demeanor caught my eye. She paused briefly, casting a glance over her shoulder. It lasted only a heartbeat, yet the look etched itself firmly into my memory. A fleeting but unmistakable expression of anxiety, raw and almost unbearable in its intensity. At the time, I dismissed it as the natural strain of a woman who had just endured a terrible accident. Such anguish, after all, would not have been surprising. But with each day that followed, the image of her troubled face returned to me with renewed force, demanding to be examined. The truth was, it hadn't been the expression of simple grief. It was not the sorrow of a close companion mourning a beloved friend. Miss Barton had cared for Amy Durrent, yes, but theirs was not the kind of deep emotional bond that could explain such consuming distress. They were employer and companion, perhaps friendly but not inseparable. And so, the question grew louder in my mind. What was the source of that sharp, almost desperate fear I had seen? Then, unwilling though I was to entertain it, another possibility began to take form. What if the Spanish woman's strange accusation had not been the ramblings of hysteria? What if Amy Durrent's drowning had not been a tragic mishap at all? Suppose instead of fighting to save her friend, Mary Barton had held her under deliberately, disguising her effort as a rescue, while in reality ensuring the poor girl would never rise again. Perhaps the struggle had proven more difficult than she expected, explaining her near collapse afterwards, but in the end, Barton had survived while Amy had not. It was the perfect place for such an act. A quiet bay, hidden from view, no one close enough to witness. She could reasonably expect her version of events to be accepted without question. But she could not have predicted my presence, an English doctor arriving at precisely the wrong moment for her scheme. And a doctor, as she would have realized at once, brought with him a dangerous possibility: the chance that Amy might be revived. I had heard of lives restored after long minutes beneath the water. Mary Barton would have known it too. She played her role with skill, excusing herself to rest and change, leaving me with the body. Yet, in that instant before she walked away completely, her composure faltered. That quick backward glance revealed everything. The look on her face had not been sorrow, it had been terror. Terror that Amy might breathe again, open her eyes, and expose her killer. Jane Hellier gave a sharp intake of breath, her fascination written plainly across her features. "Oh, how thrilling," she whispered, leaning closer. And indeed, the entire matter grew darker the more I reflected on it. Why should anyone wish to harm Amy Durrent? She was nothing more than a quiet young woman serving as companion to a lady abroad. Why would Mary Barton, respectable and self-possessed, resort to such a dreadful crime? They had seemed on good terms, without quarrels or resentment. Barton had only recently taken Amy into her household, and scarcely a day after arriving in a new country, the girl was dead. Two ordinary Englishwomen, polite and genteel, suddenly entangled in an act of violence that defied reason. It seemed unthinkable. And yet, no matter how I tried to convince myself otherwise, I could not banish the suspicion. Something grim and unnatural had taken place that day at Levee. Scene 6. A second death. Miss Hellier leaned forward, her curiosity sharpening her tone. "So in the end, Doctor, you didn't actually do anything?" Dr. Lloyd released a long breath, weariness etched in his voice. What could I have done, really? There was no proof, nothing tangible I could use. Every testimony I gathered matched Miss Barton's account. My entire suspicion rested on a fleeting look I thought I caught, or perhaps only imagined. The most practical step I could take was to trace Amy Durrent's family and notify them. When I returned to England later, I even sought out her old landlady, but that effort led nowhere. Miss Marple's eyes were steady, sharp as needles. "But even without evidence, you still felt that something was wrong, didn't you?" He gave a slow nod. "Yes. Deep down, I was uneasy. But I was also ashamed at times for harboring such thoughts. Who was I to accuse a polished, respectable Englishwoman of cold-blooded murder? I made a conscious effort to treat her with courtesy. While she remained on the island, I helped her with the local authorities, saw to the formalities. Outwardly, I behaved as any decent Englishman would toward a compatriot in a foreign land. And yet—" He paused, troubled. "I am convinced she knew. She sensed I didn't trust her." "How long did she remain after the tragedy?" Miss Marple asked quietly. "Roughly a fortnight. Amy Durrent was buried there, and about 10 days later, Miss Barton left. She claimed the whole ordeal had disturbed her too much to stay, though she had originally planned to spend the winter. She abandoned those plans entirely." "And did she appear terribly shaken?" Dr. Lloyd thought for a moment, his brow furrowed. "Curiously, no. Not as one might expect. Her composure was remarkable." Miss Marple tilted her head. "She didn't perhaps grow stouter during those weeks?" A flicker of surprise lit Dr. Lloyd's face. "Now that you mention it, yes. It was subtle, but she did seem fuller. At the time, I thought little of it, but looking back, it was peculiar." Jane Halier shuddered. "How dreadful! As if she had absorbed her victim's strength, feeding on her, almost." The doctor frowned. "Perhaps I am being unfair. She once said something that made me question my assumptions. It was on the eve of her departure. She invited me to call and thanked me sincerely for the small assistance I had given. I brushed it aside, saying any man would have done the same. She was silent for a time, then suddenly asked me, 'Do you believe there are times when taking justice into one's own hands is justified?' I told her it was a difficult matter, but generally no. The law exists to protect us, and we must obey it. She pressed me," he continued. "Even when the law is powerless," she asked. I recall frowning at her words, unsure what she meant. She explained vaguely, suggesting that sometimes a deed might be condemned by society, but carried out for a necessary reason. I replied dryly that many criminals convince themselves their motives are righteous. She recoiled, horrified. "That is terrible," she whispered. "Terrible." He paused, his voice softening. Her mood shifted then. She asked for something to help her sleep, saying she hadn't had proper rest since the dreadful event. I asked if something else was troubling her, but she grew defensive. "What could possibly be on my mind?" she snapped. I tried to explain gently that worries about past or future can rob us of sleep. She brooded for a moment, then muttered words I'll never forget. "What is the use of dwelling on the past? You can't change it. You can't bring back—" She cut herself off suddenly, then whispered, "One mustn't think. One must not think." I gave her a mild sedative and left her that night, yet her unfinished sentence haunted me. "You can't bring back what?" Dr. Lloyd's expression grew darker. Looking back, I realized that conversation prepared me for what followed. I didn't expect it, but when it came, I was not surprised. Miss Barton was not a woman of weakness, she was resolute, even stern. But that night, I saw the first crack. A seed of doubt had begun to grow. He sat forward, voice tightening. Months later, in late March, the newspapers carried the story. Miss Barton had been staying in a quiet coastal hotel in Cornwall. Guests had noticed her pacing her room at night, speaking aloud as though to unseen company. She visited the local vicar, insisting she had a terrible confession to make. She declared she had committed a crime, but then faltered, saying she would return another day. The clergyman assumed she was simply overwrought. The following morning she was gone. In her room, they found a sealed note to the coroner. It read, "I tried to confess yesterday, but she would not allow me. She silenced me. Now there is only one way left, a life for a life. My life must end as hers did. I believed myself justified. I see now I was not. To win Amy's forgiveness, I must join her. I too must drown in the sea." Dr. Lloyd's voice fell into silence. They found her body later that day, washed ashore by the tide. In the end, her conscience awakened, but far too late. Scene 7. The Hidden Truth. Mary Barton's final words, scribbled in a brief note before she vanished, carried a haunting request: "Let no one be held accountable for my death." Soon after, her clothes were discovered neatly folded on the rocky shore of a secluded inlet. The spot was infamous for its merciless currents, which dragged even the strongest swimmers to their doom. The authorities concluded she had walked deliberately into the sea. Though her body was never recovered, time passed and the courts formally declared her dead. The revelations that followed painted a more intricate picture. Mary Barton had not been a lonely spinster without means, but rather a woman of extraordinary wealth, her estate valued at a staggering $100,000. With no will in place, her fortune passed into the hands of distant relatives, cousins who lived far away in Australia. The newspapers, always cautious in tone, hinted at the earlier Canary Islands tragedy, suggesting that the shock of Amy Durrent's death might have fractured Mary Barton's mind. At the inquest, the standard verdict was delivered with solemn formality: suicide committed while of unsound mind. A heavy silence lingered over the listeners until Jane Hellier, unable to restrain herself, burst out, "But you can't stop there. That's the best part. You have to continue." Dr. Lloyd, with a weary shake of the head, answered quietly, "But, Miss Hellier, this is not a work of fiction. Real life is mercilessly abrupt. It halts exactly where it pleases." Jane stamped her foot in frustration. "But I don't want it to stop. I need to know more." Sir Henry leaned forward, his voice smooth but deliberate. "And that, Miss Hellier, is precisely where our role begins. The question Dr. Lloyd has left us is simple, but profound. Why would Mary Barton kill her companion?" Jane bit her lip, thoughtful for a moment. Oh, it could have been for any number of reasons. Perhaps Amy annoyed her, or maybe she was jealous. Dr. Lloyd didn't mention any men, but during long voyages one hears all sorts of whispers. Maybe there was some quarrel over affection. Her voice trailed off, uncertain. Mrs. Bantry's eyes lit with mischief. "I'd like to spin out a dozen theories, but I'll restrain myself. Here's one. Suppose Mary Barton's father ruined Amy Durrent's family. Perhaps Amy sought revenge. No, wait, that doesn't quite fit. Let me turn it around. What if it was Mary who wanted vengeance? Imagine Mary once had a brother who took his own life, driven to despair by Amy's father. Years later, when Amy's circumstances worsened, Mary seized her chance. She hired Amy as a companion, lured her abroad, and there, at last, exacted her revenge. She leaned back, eyes twinkling. "Well, how does that strike you?" Sir Henry considered carefully before replying. "Ingenious, a plausible theory, though as far as we know, Miss Barton never had a brother." Mrs. Bantry only grinned. "Then we simply deduce that she did. Otherwise, what motive can there be? Don't you agree, Watson?" she teased, nudging her husband. Colonel Bantry frowned. "You're just spinning tales, Dolly." "Of course I am," she replied cheerfully. "What else can we do? We haven't a single real clue." Pressed for his own idea, Colonel Bantry hesitated, then said, "Well, I think Jane was right earlier. It could easily have been about a man. Perhaps a high church clergyman. Both women might have embroidered a ceremonial cope for him, and when he wore Amy's work first, it sparked jealousy. After all, didn't Mary seek out a vicar just before she died? Women losing their heads over a handsome parson. It happens more often than people care to admit." Sir Henry gave a low chuckle. "Amusing, but perhaps too simple. I believe we must look deeper. Perhaps Mary Barton had always been unbalanced, her mind twisted by hidden delusions. People like that exist in far greater numbers than we realize. Suppose she discovered some shameful secret in Amy's past, convincing herself it was her duty to eliminate her. Later, crushed by guilt, she brought about her own end. To me, her last act speaks of a fragile mind breaking under its own weight. He turned expectantly. "Miss Marple, surely you agree?" The elderly lady smiled gently, her eyes thoughtful. "I'm afraid I don't, Sir Henry. To me, Miss Barton's final act does not suggest collapse. It suggests cleverness and forethought." Before she could elaborate, Jane let out an excited cry. "Oh, I've been so slow, it must have been blackmail. Amy was blackmailing Mary. That explains everything. But Miss Marple, why do you call Mary's actions clever if she only destroyed herself?" Sir Henry leaned forward, intrigued. "Ah, so you've seen something in this case, Miss Marple. A parallel, perhaps?" "You always tease me, Sir Henry," she answered with a modest sigh. "But yes, this story reminds me faintly of something I once encountered in Marymead. A certain Mrs. Trout managed to collect pensions for 3 different old women, each deceased in separate parishes." Sir Henry raised his brows. Remarkable fraud. Yet how does that relate here? "The connection is this," Miss Marple explained patiently. "In that case, the deception relied on one simple fact. Most elderly women look very much alike. When Dr. Lloyd first described Miss Barton and Miss Durrent, he admitted he couldn't easily tell them apart, nor, I think, could anyone else at the hotel, at least not at first. And then, the very next day, one of them was gone. Suppose the survivor simply claimed to be Miss Barton. No one would question it." The room fell silent. Sir Henry exhaled slowly, his mind turning over the implications. "You mean, the woman who lived was not Mary Barton at all, but Amy Durrent?" Miss Marple gave a gentle nod. "It is the simplest explanation, isn't it? As Mrs. Bantry remarked earlier, it makes far more sense for the poor companion to strike against the wealthy employer than the other way around." A ripple of unease passed through the gathering. Sir Henry looked both impressed and unsettled. A chilling thought. "Not chilling," Miss Marple corrected softly. "Ingenious. Consider, Amy would have worn Mary's clothes, even if they didn't quite fit, which might explain why she seemed plumper afterward. It was an impersonation carried out with remarkable boldness, and it succeeded, because no one thought to look closely enough." The group sat in stunned silence, each one digesting the startling twist Miss Marple had so calmly unfolded. Scene 8. The final coincidence. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, a faint, knowing smile crossing her face as she continued her explanation. "You see, gentlemen are inclined to believe that a lady has simply put on a little weight," she remarked with amusement, "rather than suspect that her garments have grown tight for a far darker reason." Mrs. Bantry frowned, still puzzling over the matter. But if Amy Durrent was the one who murdered Miss Barton, what could she possibly gain? She couldn't have kept up such a pretense forever. "She didn't need to," Miss Marple replied softly, her tone precise. "The deception was only necessary for a short while. I suspect she spent much of that period traveling, avoiding familiar faces. A woman of her age has the advantage of being overlooked. People rarely examine such details too closely. Even her passport photograph would not have aroused suspicion. And then, cleverly, she staged her performance in Cornwall, behaving erratically so that when her clothing and farewell note were discovered on the beach, everyone leapt to the most obvious conclusion." Sir Henry leaned forward, his expression sharp. "And what conclusion was that?" "That she had drowned," Miss Marple said firmly. "But notice the glaring detail. No body was ever recovered. The entire story was clouded with misleading suggestions, guilt, despair, remorse, even madness. Yet the stark truth remains. There was never a corpse. Mrs. Bantry gasped. "Are you telling us she never meant to take her own life at all?" "Exactly," Miss Marple said with quiet satisfaction. "She vanished deliberately, faking her death. My belief is that she fled abroad, Australia perhaps." Dr. Lloyd gave a rueful nod. "You are quite right, Miss Marple. Imagine my astonishment when I encountered her in Melbourne. Truly, you could have knocked me over with a feather." "That," Sir Henry interjected, "was the coincidence you mentioned earlier." "Indeed," Dr. Lloyd admitted gravely. "It was the sheerest misfortune for Amy Durrent, posing as Miss Barton, that I happened to be in that very place. I had signed on as a ship's doctor, and the very first person I saw upon disembarking was the woman long presumed drowned. She realized instantly that her secret was exposed. To my amazement, she chose to confess everything to me outright, speaking with a kind of cold detachment that was almost inhuman. She was a strange woman, devoid of true conscience." He paused, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "She told me her history. She had been the eldest of 9 children, all raised in poverty. Years earlier, the family had begged help from their wealthy cousin, Miss Barton, in England. But after a bitter quarrel with their father, Miss Barton had refused them outright. Resentment grew, and when the youngest children became gravely ill and costly treatment was needed, Amy devised a heartless scheme. She worked her passage to England as a nurse, then secured employment as Miss Barton's paid companion, under the false identity of Amy Durrent. She even rented lodgings under that name, furnishing the rooms to lend authenticity to her invented life. At the right moment, she struck, murdering Miss Barton and slipping seamlessly into her place. By the time she resurfaced in Australia, she and her siblings had inherited Miss Barton's fortune as legal heirs." Sir Henry gave a low whistle. "Remarkably audacious, nearly flawless. If Miss Barton had died in the Canary Islands, Amy would have been the prime suspect, and her connection to the family might have been exposed. But by altering her identity and splitting the act into stages, she removed suspicion entirely. Yes, it was very nearly the perfect crime." Mrs. Bantry looked troubled. "But what became of her in the end? What did you do, Dr. Lloyd?" Dr. Lloyd sighed deeply. "It was not an easy situation. Legally, I had no evidence, only her words to me in private. Nothing admissible in court. And as a doctor, I noticed something else. Though she looked vigorous, her health was failing. Her life would not last long. I accompanied her to see her family, and I confess they astonished me. Charming, devoted people, utterly convinced of their sister's virtue. To shatter their world with accusations I could not prove would have served no purpose. So, I allowed nature to take its course. Within 6 months, she was dead of natural causes." His gaze dropped for a moment. "I often wonder if she ever felt a trace of remorse." Mrs. Bantry murmured, "Surely she must have, in the end?" Miss Marple shook her head gently. "I doubt it. Some individuals are simply not fashioned that way. Take Mrs. Trout, for instance. Cut from the same cloth." Jane Hellier shivered and leaned forward eagerly. "It's such a chilling tale. But tell me, who exactly was this Dr. Durrent, and how does Mrs. Trout connect?" Miss Marple chuckled lightly. "Oh, no connection at all, my dear. Mrs. Trout was just an ill-natured woman from my village." Jane pouted. "How disappointing. Nothing ever seems to happen in villages. If I lived in one, I'm sure I'd never exercise my brain at all." She gave a dramatic sigh, drawing amused smiles from the others. The conversation soon shifted, drifting towards speculation about crimes yet undiscovered, each of them, from Colonel Bantry to Sir Henry, and even Miss Marple herself, offering their musings as the evening shadows grew longer. The drawing-room had grown quieter, though not from lack of company. A kind of reflective stillness hung in the air, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the faint rustle of evening outside. Amid the gentle conversation, one figure had remained curiously detached. Sir Henry Clithering, the retired Commissioner of Scotland Yard, leaned back in his chair, twirling the ends of his moustache with a faintly amused smile, as if savouring a private recollection. Mrs. Bantry, watching him with a mix of impatience and teasing curiosity, finally burst out, "Sir Henry, if you persist in sitting there like an oracle withholding prophecy, I swear I shall scream. Are you deliberately keeping us in suspense?" Her words drew a ripple of laughter, but Sir Henry merely chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "Ah, Mrs. Bantry, you sound exactly like the newspapers. Scotland Yard at fault again. Headlines that never fail to suggest a mountain of unsolved mysteries piling up on our desks." Dr. Lloyd lifted his head with interest. "But surely those are only a fraction, aren't they? I imagine the majority of cases are resolved, though they don't make for sensational news." "Quite right, Doctor," Sir Henry agreed. "Successful investigations, the ones where justice quietly prevails, rarely find their way into print. The public craves scandal, not competence." He paused, then added more gravely, "But there is a distinction worth noting between crimes that are never solved and crimes that are never discovered at all." Mrs. Bantry's brow furrowed. "Never discovered? Surely those must be rare." Sir Henry's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Rarer than one would wish to believe, perhaps, but they exist." From her quiet corner, Miss Marple spoke with her usual calm certainty. "I should think so. Human carelessness is often the undoing of wrongdoers, but intelligence paired with moral emptiness can be dreadfully efficient. If someone is clever enough, their secret might remain hidden indefinitely." Sir Henry inclined his head. "Precisely. In fact, most cases that do reach us are the result of blunders, an overheard remark, a slip of hand, a foolish oversight. When a scheme collapses, it is rarely by design of law, but by the arrogance or miscalculation of the culprit. Which leads one to wonder, how many acts have been committed so perfectly that no suspicion was ever raised?" Colonel Bantry gave a low whistle. "That's a disturbing thought, Clithering. Are you suggesting the world is full of successful criminals we never hear of?" "Not full," Sir Henry corrected gently. "But it happens. Crime may escape the arm of the law, but it seldom escapes consequence. Cause and effect has its own relentless logic. Every deed leaves its shadow, even if not in a courtroom." Colonel Bantry frowned. "Still, the notion of wrongdoing completely undetected, it's unsettling. There's something fundamentally unjust about it." Sir Henry's expression grew somber. "Most discussions focus on guilt, on the wrongdoer. But what of the innocent, those left carrying a burden of suspicion that is not theirs?" Jane Hellier, who had been following with wide-eyed curiosity, leaned forward. "I don't follow. How could someone innocent bear guilt?" Miss Marple's soft voice interjected. "It happens, my dear. Imagine a housekeeper, let us call her Mrs. Arthur, suspected of stealing a sum of money. The family, unwilling to accuse outright, nevertheless ceases to trust her. The air around her shifts, others sense the unspoken doubt, and soon she is judged without proof. Then, quite by chance, the truth comes out. The governor himself is revealed as the thief, betrayed by something as trivial as a reflection in a mirror. To the family, it is a curious twist. To Mrs. Arthur, it is salvation. Until then, she lived as though condemned." "Exactly so," Sir Henry said gravely. "In her case, justice prevailed, but there are many who carry the brand of suspicion for a lifetime, never cleared, never believed. That is a tragedy the law cannot amend." Mrs. Bantry studied him keenly. "You're speaking from experience. This isn't just theory, is it?" For a long moment, Sir Henry was silent, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. At last, he nodded. "Yes, there is one case that has never left me. A murder. Of that I am convinced, and yet no evidence could prove it." Jane Hellier's eyes widened with theatrical excitement. "Murder? Was it poison? Some rare, untraceable foreign substance?" Dr. Lloyd shifted uneasily. "Surely not." But Sir Henry only shook his head, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. "No poison, no melodrama, just a fall down a staircase, an old man, a broken neck. Officially an accident, but in truth, I have never been certain." Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her eyes intent. "But you don't really believe it was an accident, do you?" Sir Henry gave a slight shrug, his face betraying little. "The evidence points otherwise, perhaps a deliberate shove, perhaps even a cord stretched across the staircase and then removed. The truth is, we shall never know with absolute certainty." Dr. Lloyd adjusted himself in his chair, his brow furrowed. "But why assume it was murder at all? What convinces you it was intentional?" Sir Henry released a slow breath. "That's the heart of it, isn't it? We cannot prove anything. 4 people were present in that house, and if foul play was involved, one of them was guilty. That leaves the other 3 forever burdened by suspicion, unable to free themselves from the shadow of doubt." "How dreadful!" murmured Mrs. Bantry, her voice soft but troubled. "You must tell us everything, Sir Henry." He hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "Very well. The story begins years earlier, across the Channel, in Germany. After the war, a ruthless brotherhood emerged, calling themselves Die Schwarze Hand, the Black Hand. Not unlike the infamous Camorra, they thrived on extortion, fear, and blackmail. Their reach spread quickly, their grip tightening on countless lives. To betray them was to sign one's own death warrant. And so, their secrecy remained unbroken. Sir Henry's voice lowered as he continued. Few in England had even heard the name, but in Germany, the very whisper of them inspired dread. People trusted no one, not even family. But every empire, no matter how fearsome, eventually falters. Their undoing came through one man, Dr. Rosen. A former intelligence officer, he penetrated their ranks, uncovered their codes, and dismantled their structure piece by piece. His victory was extraordinary, but it came at a cost. "Retribution," said Colonel Melchett grimly. "Precisely," Sir Henry agreed. "The remnants of the Black Hand vowed Rosen would not live. He escaped to England under special protection, the authorities in Berlin warning us of the threat upon his life. I spoke with him myself. He was calm, almost fatalistic. 'They will come for me, Sir Henry,' he told me in his thick, steady voice. 'I knew the risk when I began. All I ask is time. I have work yet unfinished.' He was a man of formidable presence. His words weighted with resignation but also resolve. His task, he said, was to gather and analyze a trove of intelligence before the inevitable happened. I promised him precautions, but he merely smiled knowingly. 'When it comes,' he said, 'you will know you tried.' To avoid attention, Rosen settled in a secluded Somerset village, King's Naton. Isolated, untouched by modern bustle, it was the perfect refuge. He purchased a modest but comfortable cottage, made it secure, and moved in with 4 trusted companions, his niece Greta, his loyal housekeeper Gertrude, who had served him faithfully for nearly 40 years, a secretary, Charles Templeton, and a local gardener, Dobbs, who had never ventured far from the village. For months, all was quiet. Then, one morning, the peace shattered. Rosen was discovered at the foot of his staircase, his neck broken. The scene could have been passed off as a tragic misstep, yet something felt amiss. No intruder had been seen. The village was too small for a stranger to arrive unnoticed. Both front and back doors were secured, and every member of the household possessed their own key, which meant, if it wasn't accident, then Rosen's killer lived under his own roof. Mrs. Bantry gave a small gasp. Unthinkable. One of his own. Colonel Melchet's voice cut in. What about this secretary? He sounds the most likely of the lot. But Sir Henry surprised them all. Templeton was one of mine, he revealed quietly. I placed him there myself. Rosen needed a secretary, yes, but I needed a pair of eyes to watch over him without arousing suspicion. Templeton was ideal, educated, fluent in German, discreet. He was beyond reproach. The group fell silent, absorbing the revelation. If Templeton was trusted, then suspicion must fall elsewhere, upon Greta, Gertrude, or Dobbs. The idea seemed abhorrent, yet not impossible. Sir Henry gave them no comfort. Family ties, he said gravely, can fracture under strain. History has shown us blood offers no guarantee of loyalty. Greta may have harbored some secret grudge or a misplaced allegiance. As for Gertrude, decades of service may conceal resentment, some long-nursed wound hidden beneath her devotion. And Dobbs, though simple and rooted to his soil, money is a powerful lever. Could he have been bribed or threatened? Dr. Lloyd leaned forward. And you believe one of them acted for the Black Hand? Sir Henry's expression darkened. That organization never struck blindly. If Rosen was killed, it was because someone had received the order. Someone inside that cottage. How exactly was the message delivered? Jane Hellier asked with a faint shiver, echoing the very question Sir Henry had declared to be at the heart of the mystery. The command, once dispatched, had been executed without hesitation. Whoever orchestrated this scheme relied on ruthless efficiency. Delay was simply not in their nature. Someone within that household had received the order and acted upon it immediately. The only puzzle was how it had arrived and to whom. Determined to untangle the knot, Sir Henry meticulously retraced every arrival at the cottage on the day Dr. Rosen died. He believed that in the most ordinary exchanges, the comings and goings of delivery men and servants, lay the single thread that would unravel the case. Opening an envelope, he withdrew several papers. "Let us revisit the details," he said with calm precision. First came the butcher, dropping off a portion of neck of mutton. No irregularities there. Soon after, the grocer's boy appeared, his basket holding corn flour, 2 pounds of sugar, a pound of butter, and a pound of coffee. Again, nothing suspicious. Then the postman arrived, handing over 2 advertising circulars addressed to Frau Rosen, a local letter addressed to Gertrude, 3 pieces of correspondence for Dr. Rosen, 1 from abroad, and finally 2 letters for Mr. Templeton, one of those also bearing a foreign stamp. Sir Henry produced a neat pile of these documents. These were recovered from wastebaskets or voluntarily surrendered. Experts examined them, tested for hidden codes, secret inks, any concealed message. Nothing unusual was discovered. He spread the papers across the table. Among them lay catalogues from a nurseryman and a London fur merchant. Dr. Rosen had received a gardening invoice and a stationery supplier's bill. But it was one letter in particular that drew attention. Reading it aloud, Sir Henry said, "My dear, just returned from Dr. Helmuth's baths. I happened to meet Edgar Jackson. He and Amos Perry have only just come back from Tsingtao. To be candid, I cannot envy their journey. Write soon with your news. And once again, beware of a certain individual. You know whom I mean, though you may refuse to acknowledge it. Yours, Jean." The room was silent as he laid the paper down. He then turned to Templeton's correspondence. One was an ordinary account from his tailor, but the other, a German letter, he had torn up and discarded while walking outdoors. Finally, Gertrude's single letter was read aloud, an invitation to a church social. The vicar would be delighted by her presence, the writer added kindly, and she was also thanked for her excellent ham recipe. Dr. Lloyd chuckled, exchanging a glance with Mrs. Bantry. "I think we can safely disregard that one." "Perhaps," Sir Henry replied, though he explained that he had nonetheless verified both the identity of Mrs. Green and the existence of the church gathering. "One cannot be too thorough." "Miss Marple would certainly approve," Lloyd remarked. At that, Miss Marple, who had been sitting in thoughtful silence, suddenly leaned forward. "How foolish of me," she murmured. "I was only now struck by the fact that the word honesty in Dr. Rosen's letter is written with a capital H." Mrs. Bantry picked up the sheet quickly. "You're right, it is." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with understanding. "A deliberate signal, my dear. Quite plain once you notice." "Someone was warning him," Colonel Bantry added gravely. "But warning him of what, or of whom?" "That is precisely the question that troubles me," Sir Henry agreed. "And consider this oddity. Templeton himself admitted that Rosen had opened the letter at breakfast, glanced at it, and tossed it across the table with a dismissive, "I've no idea who sent this." Yet, the signature is clearly written. "Jane Helier interjected. "Or possibly George," Dr. Lloyd suggested. "The name is ambiguous, but what strikes me is that the handwriting appears distinctly masculine." Colonel Bantry frowned. Why fling it across the table like that? Was Rosen trying to observe someone's reaction? His niece, perhaps, or the secretary? Even the cook could have been present serving the meal. Mrs. Bantry bent over the letter again. "Even so, I don't quite see—" Her brow furrowed as she struggled to trace the implications. Meanwhile, Miss Marple bent closer, running her fingertip across the page while whispering to Mrs. Bantry. Jane Helier suddenly broke the hush. "But why did Templeton destroy the other letter? Doesn't that strike anyone as strange? A German correspondence. Why tear it up unless it contained something he wished hidden? And why was he receiving foreign mail at all?" Miss Marple straightened instantly. Sir Henry never claimed Templeton was above suspicion. He merely noted 4 possible suspects. Surely that means Mr. Templeton is among them. Am I correct? "Yes, Miss Marple," Sir Henry admitted, his voice low. "Never assume anyone is entirely innocent. In my years of service, I've learned that betrayal can spring from the most trusted quarters. Armies, police forces, even intelligence services all suffer from traitors in their midst. We cannot exclude him." Sir Henry paused, his expression darkening as the weight of his thoughts pressed upon him. "Miss Helier raised a question I had already been turning over in my mind," he admitted quietly. "Why, out of all the household, was Templeton the only one unable to produce his letter? And why, of all places, was he receiving correspondence from Germany?" He exhaled sharply, recalling the moment. So I confronted him. His reply was simple enough. He claimed an aunt had married a German, and the letter was from his cousin. That was something I had never known before. It altered the entire picture. Suddenly, Charles Templeton was no longer just a bright young man I admired. He was a man with foreign ties, connections that might not withstand scrutiny. The admission seemed to drain him, and for a moment his voice faltered. It placed him among the suspects, perhaps even at the very top. It was bitter for me to face. I have always liked him, trusted him, but fairness demanded I could not rule him out. The room grew tense, silence stretching until Sir Henry broke it once more. "And yet," he murmured, This is more than the pursuit of a murderer. What hangs in the balance is not merely guilt or innocence, but a man's reputation, his future, the very substance of his life. A shadow cast by suspicion alone can destroy that, and I cannot ignore it." Miss Marple coughed delicately, her tone gentle yet perceptive. "Then, Sir Henry, if I understand you correctly, it is young Mr. Templeton who troubles you most." Sir Henry gave a weary nod. "That's the truth of it. In theory, each of the four should weigh on me equally, but in reality it is not so. Take Dus, for example. Though I suspect him, his life will remain untouched by gossip. The villagers never questioned Dr. Rosen's death. To them, it was an accident. Gertrude? Yes, she might suffer a little. Frida Rosen's confidence in her may waver. But Templeton, for him, everything stands on the edge of collapse. His future, his career, his happiness, that is what gnaws at me." He hesitated, his eyes drifting as though picturing the faces in his memory. Greta Rosen stood at the heart of it, a beautiful young woman, and Templeton, a strikingly handsome man. 5 months in isolation had bound them together in ways words could scarcely capture. They might not have confessed their feelings aloud, but affection was there, ripening quietly with each shared glance. Then disaster struck, and everything fractured. 3 months after the tragedy, not long after Sir Henry had returned, Greta had come to see him. She had sold the cottage, settled her uncle's affairs, and was preparing to go back to Germany. Though she knew he was retired, she had sought him not for professional advice, but for something far more personal. At first, she skirted around the subject, hesitant and uncertain. But eventually she confessed what burdened her, her unease over the torn letter with the German stamp. She told him she believed Templeton's explanation, but her mind would not rest. What if it meant something more sinister? What if she was wrong to trust him? Sir Henry had listened patiently, then pressed her with a direct question. "Tell me honestly, Greta, were you and Charles in love?" Her eyes had filled with a mix of joy and sorrow. "I believe so," she whispered. "Yes, it was love. We were happy. Every day felt right. There was no hurry. We both knew we had time. One day he would speak the words, and I would answer them. We didn't need to say it. We simply knew. But now," her voice broke, "now everything has changed. A shadow has come between us. When we meet, we hardly know what to say. We're both asking ourselves the same dreadful question. Oh, if only I could be certain. That is why I came to you, Sir Henry. Tell me I can trust him. Tell me beyond doubt that Charles Templeton did not kill my uncle. I beg you." Sir Henry clenched his fists as he recalled the moment, his voice tightening with regret. "And curse it all, I couldn't give her that assurance. Those two will drift apart, suspicion gnawing at them like a phantom that refuses to be laid to rest." He sank back into his chair, the fatigue etched deeply into his face. Then suddenly, a spark lit within him. He straightened, a faint, almost mischievous smile flickering across his lips. "Unless," he said softly, "unless Miss Marple can help us. That letter, the one about the church social, surely it falls into your realm, doesn't it? Doesn't it remind you of something that explains this whole business? Perhaps you could do what I cannot, and save 2 young people from misery." Though he spoke lightly, there was an undercurrent of urgency in his appeal. Over the years, Sir Henry had come to respect Miss Marple's quiet brilliance, and now his eyes searched hers with something close to desperation. The elderly lady, calm as ever, adjusted the lace at her wrist and gave a small measured nod. "Well," she said thoughtfully, "it does put me in mind of Annie Pony. To Mrs. Bantry and myself, the meaning of that letter is perfectly obvious, not the church social one, mind you, but the other." Sir Henry's brow furrowed in puzzlement. "Obvious to you, perhaps, Miss Marple," he muttered, "but certainly not to me." "But not to me? What am I failing to notice?" Sir Henry muttered, his brows furrowing in frustration. Mrs. Bantry, who had been listening with more attention than she usually gave to such discussions, suddenly snatched up a gardening catalogue resting nearby. Her fingers flipped briskly through the pages until she began reading aloud in her clear, confident voice. Dr. Helmuth's Spa, pure lilac, a delicate bloom with strong, upright stems, perfect for cutting and arrangements. Edgar Jackson, chrysanthemum-like in shape, a deep brick red. O.S. Perry, decorative and striking, radiant scarlet. Singer, a brilliant orange red, an impressive plant for the summer garden. And finally, Honesty. She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. With a capital H, if you please. With deliberate flourish, Mrs. Bantry tossed the catalogue onto the table. "There you have it," she announced triumphantly. Miss Marple gave a slight nod. "Indeed. Now, Sir Henry, take the initials D-A-T-H. What do you see?" Sir Henry blinked. "Death," he murmured, almost reluctantly. "Precisely," Miss Marple confirmed, her tone calm yet firm. The letter was not a harmless whim. It was a warning, a clever one, but still a warning. "But it was addressed to Dr. Rosen," Sir Henry objected. "Surely he would have sensed something suspicious." "That is the brilliance of it," Miss Marple replied, her eyes glinting with quiet intelligence. "To him, it would appear nothing more than a harmless list. An elderly gentleman, faced with such a letter, would likely dismiss it, perhaps hand it straight to his secretary without a second glance. Innocuous, perfectly so." Sir Henry's expression darkened. "Then, Templeton?" Miss Marple shook her head gently. "No, Sir Henry. If Charles Templeton were the culprit, such a letter would never have been allowed into the open. He would have destroyed it without hesitation. His innocence, if I may put it that way, shines through precisely because the letter was not suppressed." "Then who?" Sir Henry demanded, leaning forward. "The answer," Miss Marple said softly, "is simple. Someone else was at the breakfast table that morning. Someone who reached for that letter with ease and read it without hesitation." Sir Henry paled. "Greta Rosen," he whispered at last. Miss Marple gave him a knowing look. "Gentlemen rarely discern such things, Sir Henry. It is not meant unkindly, but women often perceive the subtleties of one another far more keenly. Greta Rosen's visit to you was not merely social, you see. She used that moment to reinforce your doubts about Templeton. Before she came, you were undecided. After her departure, you were convinced. That was no accident." Sir Henry exhaled, shaken. "I can't believe it. That girl, to commit murder so coldly, and then simply walk away free." "Oh, not free," Miss Marple said quietly, her voice carrying a strange certainty. "Not truly. She will never escape her fate. You yourself observed not long ago, justice has many forms. Greta Rosen is entangled with dangerous companions, extortionists, fanatics. They will not spare her. One way or another she is doomed. It is the innocent we must worry for, not the guilty." Her tone softened. "Think of Gertrude, the faithful servant. Suspicion has clung to her unfairly. I've seen it before. An old housekeeper burdened by whispers of theft or dishonor until her spirit breaks. Once a devoted maid named Annie Portney spent 50 years in service, only to have her final years clouded by such suspicions. A missing will hidden away for safekeeping was found too late. Annie had already died, her heart broken. That is what I fear for poor Gertrude. That unfounded suspicion will stain what remains of her days." Sir Henry's face grew somber. "You must write to her," Miss Marple urged gently. "Assure her that she is cleared, that she is blameless. The loss of her employer is heavy enough. She should not suffer under needless doubt as well." Sir Henry studied her keenly, then nodded. "Yes, Miss Marple, I will write, but I confess, I'll never quite understand the way your mind works. Always so different, so unexpected." She gave a small, self-conscious smile. "My perspective is limited, I fear. I hardly ever stray beyond St. Mary Mead." Sir Henry chuckled. "And yet you've unravelled what borders on an international affair." Miss Marple's expression softened, touched with memory. "My sister and I once had a German governess. She was a most sentimental woman, and she taught us the old language of flowers. A custom quite forgotten now, though charming in its day. Did you know a yellow tulip means hopeless love, and a china aster signifies jealousy so consuming it becomes death at your feet? That letter was signed Dahlia, or rather, Dali in German. That was the final clue." She frowned thoughtfully. "I only wish I could recall what the dahlia itself symbolizes. My memory fails me there." Sir Henry smiled faintly. "At least it doesn't mean death." "Horrid thought," Miss Marple exclaimed with a shudder. "There's enough sorrow in the world without that." Mrs. Bantry sighed. "Thank goodness we have flowers and friends." Dr. Lloyd smirked. "Notice, she lists us last." Jane leaned back, eyes glistening with nostalgia. "A man used to send me orchids every night in my theatre days, purple ones." Miss Marple brightened. "Ah, the purple orchid. I await your favour," she explained. Sir Henry coughed discreetly and looked away, while Miss Marple suddenly sat upright, her eyes alight. "I remember now," she cried. "Dahlia. It means treachery and misrepresentation." Sir Henry gave a low whistle, his admiration unmistakable. "Remarkable," he murmured. "Absolutely remarkable." Agatha Christie's The Companion. Analytical Breakdown. Scene 1. A gathering of storytellers. In Colonel Bantry's warm drawing room, conversation drifts from idle chatter into mystery. Jane Hellier, with her theatrical charm, urges Dr. Lloyd to share something unsettling from his past. The room, filled with familiar Christie figures like Miss Marple and Sir Henry, becomes a stage for curiosity. At first, Dr. Lloyd hesitates, but eventually a half-forgotten memory rises, a peculiar incident from his travels abroad. What we learn. Even in ordinary settings, human curiosity leans toward the strange and the sinister. Jane's insistence sets the tone for the story, a group of friends craving something that blends entertainment with the macabre. Theme. Human nature has an irresistible pull toward dark tales, not out of cruelty, but fascination. Question for viewers. Would you have pushed Dr. Lloyd to share a mystery, or stayed content with small talk? Scene 2. A vacation in the Canary Islands. Dr. Lloyd recalls his time in Las Palmas, painting the harbor as a crossroads of the world. At a hotel dance, his eye is drawn first to a striking Spanish dancer, a woman whose beauty hints at drama. Yet, fate attaches itself not to her, but to two quiet English ladies, Miss Mary Barton and her companion, Miss Amy Durrent. Their appearance is plain, unremarkable, yet by the next day, tragedy will entwine them in a tale darker than any stage performance. What we learn: appearances deceive. Those who seem destined for adventure may lead ordinary lives, while the quiet ones may carry the seeds of tragedy. Theme: destiny often lies in the overlooked corners, not in the spotlight. Question for viewers. Who would you have noticed more, the dazzling dancer or the reserved English women? Scene 3. The tragedy by the bay. During a picnic outing, the group stumbles upon chaos at a fishing village. Two women had ventured into the sea. One returned alive, the other drowned. Dr. Lloyd does all he can to revive Amy Durrent, but fails. The survivor, Mary Barton, describes events with unsettling composure, though her grief seems more dazed than heartfelt. What we learn, crisis often reveals the true strength, or detachment, of a person's character. Mary's calmness plants the first seed of doubt. Theme: in moments of disaster, emotion, or the lack of it, speaks volumes. Question for viewers: do you believe Mary's calmness was strength, or a mask hiding something darker? Scene 4. The Enigma of Amy Durrent. As Amy's past is examined, her life seems almost ghostly. No family ties, no close friends, barely a trace left behind. A villager insists she saw Mary push Amy under the waves, though such testimony is dismissed as hysteria. Still, unease lingers. Dr. Lloyd recalls the chilling expression on Mary's face after the drowning, not grief, but something far colder. What we learn: the absence of roots and connections makes Amy a perfect victim. She could vanish from the world almost unnoticed. Theme: sometimes the silence of a person's past is as telling as words. Question for viewers: would you trust Mary Barton's version of events or the villager's disturbing account? Scene 5. The final clue. Dr. Lloyd replays Mary's backward glance, a fleeting moment of raw fear. He realizes she wasn't terrified of loss, but of revival. If Amy had been revived, the truth may have surfaced. The possibility that Mary intentionally drowned her companion takes root, though proof is lacking. What we learn: small gestures, a glance, a hesitation, can betray more than spoken words. Theme: truth often hides in fleeting moments of weakness. Question for viewers: do you believe in instincts? Could a single look expose guilt? Scene 6. A second death. Back in England, Mary Barton tries to carry on, but cracks appear. She confides troubling thoughts about justice beyond the law. Months later, unable to silence her conscience, she walks deliberately into the sea, leaving behind a confession note. Her death seems a tragic echo of Amy's. What we learn: guilt, once planted, grows until it consumes the mind completely. Theme: conscience can act as the harshest judge of all. Question for viewers: do you think Mary's end was true remorse or fear of discovery? Scene 7. The hidden truth. The group debates Mary's motives until Miss Marple suggests a shocking twist. What if the drowned woman was not Amy at all, but Mary? What if Amy assumed her employer's identity, taking her wealth and freedom? This interpretation reframes the tragedy entirely, a companion's clever crime disguised as misfortune. What we learn: the greatest deceptions are those no one even suspects, a change of identity hidden in plain sight. Theme: crime often succeeds not through brilliance, but through the complacency of others. Question for viewers: which theory convinces you more, Mary killing Amy or Amy stealing Mary's identity? Scene 8. The final coincidence. Years later, Dr. Lloyd encounters Amy, alive and living under Mary's name, in Australia. She confesses her plot with chilling detachment. Driven by resentment and poverty, she replaced her wealthy cousin, securing fortune for her family. In the end, she dies naturally, untouched by the law. Miss Marple reminds the group that true justice lies not always in courts, but in the inevitability of consequences. What we learn: the law may fail, but fate often finds its way. Theme: some crimes escape punishment, yet rarely escape consequence. Question for viewers: do you think Amy truly got away with it, or was her early death its own form of justice? Here's a clean character breakdown of Agatha Christie's The Companion. At the heart of the companion stands Dr. Lloyd, the country doctor whose recollection of a peculiar holiday incident provides the backbone of the tale, his hesitant memory stirring suspicion and unease. The story begins with Jane Hellier, a celebrated actress admired more for beauty than skill, pressing him for something chilling to entertain the evening guests in Colonel Bantry's drawing room. Bantry himself, genial and welcoming, sets the stage as host, while his lively wife fills the role of the curious listener, offering speculative theories that mirror the audience's own intrigue. Among the company is Miss Marple, the quiet yet piercing observer whose calm insight ultimately reframes the entire mystery, and Sir Henry Clithering, a retired commissioner whose presence lends authority and prompts deeper consideration of motive and possibility. Within Dr. Lloyd's account emerge the key figures of the mystery: Miss Mary Barton, a wealthy Englishwoman who appears as the survivor of a tragic drowning, yet whose role hovers ambiguously between victim and imposter, and Miss Amy Durrent, introduced as her companion, seemingly the victim, but ultimately revealed as the architect of deception. Dr. Penderley supplements the tale with medical authority, emphasizing Amy's shadowy past and the gaps that make her life difficult to trace. The narrative later broadens to another embedded case, introducing Dr. Rosen, a man hiding from a criminal organization whose mysterious death unsettles his quiet household. His niece Greta embodies suspicion and betrayal, while Gertrude, his long-serving housekeeper, illustrates how the innocent can unfairly suffer under the weight of doubt. Charles Templeton, Rosen's secretary and supposedly trusted observer, becomes the focus of suspicion when a torn letter raises questions about loyalty, and Dobbs, the gardener, is briefly cast as a possible suspect, though his role remains that of a simple, peripheral figure. Together, these characters form a web of voices, some serving as storytellers, others as suspects, and still others as keen observers, each contributing to a layered mystery where identity, trust, and deception blur the line between victim and criminal. My final opinion. In the end, The Companion is less about the mechanics of crime and more about the unsettling ways identity, trust, and perception can be manipulated. What begins as a simple tale of a drowning unfurls into a layered deception where the true victim and culprit are never who they first appear to be. Christie uses the quiet Englishwomen, seemingly ordinary, almost forgettable, as the very center of extraordinary intrigue, reminding us that danger often hides in plain sight. The story also underscores the fragility of truth, how quickly an eyewitness account can be dismissed, how easily wealth and respectability can mask guilt, and how silence about one's past can become both a shield and a weapon. Ultimately, Miss Marple's quiet deduction brings clarity, but the lingering unease lies in how close Amy Durrent came to escaping with the perfect crime. The tale leaves us with a haunting reminder that justice in Christie's world is not always delivered by courts or policemen, but by conscience, chance, and the keen eye of those willing to see beneath the surface. Well, my dear, that brings us to the end of today's tale. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed telling it. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, do me a little favor. Tap that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you'll always know when a new mystery begins. Until next time, stay curious and good night.